last year, Colleen Kane was selected by the Thunderbirds as the Michigan hometown hero. She got to spend the day with the Thunderbirds, and in the afternoon she went flying in the back seat of Thunderbird 8. And she pulled 9.2 Gs, and she did all the different stuff, and she didn't barf. So that's absolutely amazing. But it was just, you know, the one person in the state of Michigan was our AFA Teacher of the Year. So I mean, what a great statement that is. So last meeting up in Sterling Heights, we were actually at Starbase. For those of you who weren't able to join us, Starbase is about STEM education for elementary school kids. A wonderful facility there. We got to tour it, we got to talk there, but one of the things we also did was introduce our Teacher of the Year for this year, Eric Thuma. So we just did the paperwork for Eric to make for his competition at the national level. Our last two Michigan Teachers of the Year came in second place nationwide, then third place nationwide. So we're going to get the trifecta. We want to get first place one of these times. But it's just one of the many, many great programs that AFA supports around the country. Other updates, the convention is in September. That's the internal business of the AFA. And that's always followed by the Air, Space, and Cyber Conference back in Washington, D.C. And that's like 17 to 20,000 people that get together. All the senior Air Force leadership, they make announcements, they have great sessions and everything else. So if anybody would like to plan on being part of either the convention or the conference, please talk to me. Hopefully if you're a member of the AFA, you're getting the emails about this and you're able to sign up and register. But if you'd like to go see how the sausage is made, if you will, on the AFA side on that weekend before, please join. And if for those of you who haven't told, I'm actually up for what they call Director at Large position. So it looks like come September I will be on the board of the AFA at the national level, which will be cool. And I say that because it's an elected position, but as of right now, I have no opposition. So hopefully I can win this election. We'll see. It's going to be tough competition. Me or any other person fill in the blank. Spring forward into next month, we've got in July 12th, we're going to be talking the big picture. I've never really sat down and talked about our Air Force today. So you're going to end up with me as a guest speaker at our next time around. We're going to be meeting in Velocity. It's a new location. We're going to have a taco bar. Yes, I said tacos. But we're going to talk the big picture about the force structure of the people, the infrastructure of the Air Force. So it'll be a great topic there. For our our virtual meeting, if you will, on the, do my math here, what's that, the 18th? That third Thursday, we're going to have, he's actually a cyber expert. He was an F-105 pilot in Vietnam, but his claim to fame is since then being an executive when working cyber issues. And then for here, we're going to be having folks from Battle Creek coming down and talking specifically about MQ-9 operations. So the RPAs, the drones, and how they operate. We had the 110th come in and talk kind of like the big picture of what they do. This time we're going to dive into that platform, that weapon system, how it operates, things they do. So we're going to do a lot deeper dive on RPA operations. And then next month we have our big picnic up in Sterling Heights, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're not on the mailing list and would like to be, please let me know, and we'll make sure you're included on all those invitations. We have plates, we have napkins, we have bowls. Fights on!
I always wanted to fly or go to the Air Force Academy, but I also wanted to go to law school or medical school, so I thought, what better way to serve my country in the reserves and still have a civilian life? Because my mom was a doctor, and one of the reasons, I'll give you a little bit brief before we get into the topic here. My parents, the reason why I joined the military was because my parents came here as legal immigrants. And my mother was in Auschwitz the last 3 years of the war as a real young girl, and my dad was in a Nazi labor camp on the Austrian-German border, and he was liberated by the 101st Airborne Division. I don't know what company. I pray that it was Easy Company, but I don't know. It sounds really good, but I don't know. But anyway, my parents came here and found a country that they believed in freedom, and loved this country more than anything. And when they raised me to never forget my heritage. And I speak Polish, by the way. But they also taught me to love this country more than anything. And that's why I wanted to join the military. So I enlisted in the Army because the Air Force didn't let you enlist at 17 and go into a reserve program. And so I enlisted in the Army, was still in Civil Air Patrol, and I went to U of M where Colonel Arns,
Like a pirate.
Colonel Arns was there. And from Detachment 390. And after about a year there, and I told the general, I was talking with the general about 2 weeks ago, and I told him about how my eyes went bad. And my pilot dreams withered away because I was the class year of 1988, so that was the Top Gun class year, where everybody saw the movie and they rushed out to be Air Force pilots or Navy pilots, and it was better to be Air Force pilot because you didn't have to be stuck on a boat with 5,000 other guys for about 9 months.
Amen.
Amen. I'm with you. And by the way, I will make some Air Force jokes, but I want you to know that the Air Force is still my favorite branch.
All right.
My heart and my love is with the Army. I appreciate the Marine Corps. I can't stand the Navy. So let's just get that out of the way. Go Army, beat Navy. God bless the Air Force.
We got no squids here.
Space Force, you know, we gave birth, we, the Army, gave birth to the Air Force in 1948, September 1st of 1948. I still remember that date.
47.
Okay, whatever. It was a long birthing process, General.
By the way, Air Force Association existed 18 months before the U.S.
Before-
Air Force.
Look at that, look at that. And you guys, the Air Force, gave birth to the Space Force, so I kind of feel like a grandfather. I guess that's the best way to say it. I kind of feel like a grandfather.
At your age, it's great-grandfather.
Yes, great-grandfather. But as Carl mentioned, and I'm going to make this as simple as possible, Carl mentioned that we were going to talk about the Middle East and about what's been happening because our focus has been so centric on the Middle East, but I'm going to get into some things that were recently declassified that we can actually talk about. Because the Middle East has been in constant, perpetual war for many years. And some of you may ask, why would I know this? Or why would I know so much about the Middle East? Well, I've been there multiple times in uniform, as well as in a business suit, as well as in a private capacity, in a more recreational capacity. You may wonder, why would you go to the Middle East in a recreational capacity? Because it's beautiful.
Yes, it is.
It truly is a beautiful, incredible wonder. And when you think about the Middle East, you think about the Holy Land. And that's the heartbeat. And in that Holy Land, that's the only place in the world that you have three of the major religions fighting over the same parcel of property. Jerusalem. You have Islam, you have Judaism, and you have Christianity. And we all believe in the same God, and we all believe in the same Holy Land, but we all have different ways of going around, and we beat the hell out of each other, don't we? So, I hope to give you a little bit of clarity and shock you a little bit today when I share with you some of the stories about the Middle East. Because the true issue with the current Middle East, in the old days, in the 13th, 14th century, all the way up to the 20th century, it was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was the one that kept the law, kept Islamic law, kept the Middle East organized and running. Everything was organized. And the Ottoman Empire lasted till the 20th century. After that, you saw more nationalism. And what's interesting about nationalism is you saw the real birth of Arabic nationalism happen in 1956. In 1956, when you had the Suez Crisis, many people may not realize I had to write a paper in the Army when I was going through Command and General Staff College, which I think is what for the Air Force?
Air Command and Staff College is the intermediate, the middle.
It's the intermediate, so you guys call it Air Command and
Air
Staff
Command
College?
and Staff College.
We call it General and Staff College, so then you go on to War College. I had to write a paper for the Army. We had 3 phases, and the last phase, you had to write papers and you had to talk about how you would defend certain things and the different political aspects.
So the first phase was the actual coloring with the crayons.
Sir, I apologize.
He wasn't a Marine.
You have misunderstood. This is the Army, not the Marine Corps.
Right, I was saying,
No,
But I will
that's-
speak slowly for those
that's
in the
what
Air Force.
Flavor red is in that case, but okay.
Now you understand why a general in the Air Force is about the same combatant control command as about a sergeant in the Army. General, sir. Anyway, where I was heading with this, before I was so rudely interrupted, just kidding, General, I apologize.
All good.
Due respect to you. What's really interesting about the Middle East is now we have gone into a new modern era. After World War II, many nations got together and there was a Yalta Agreement, which hurt my family because Yalta was the agreement between Stalin, de Gaulle, Roosevelt, and one of my favorite people that was there that actually resisted it, and that was Winston Churchill. And he was pushed into it, by the way. It cut east and west. And when they cut east and west, and after World War II, they brought the Jews back to a homeland where they could have a homeland and that never again would they be persecuted. And they brought them back to what was then called Israel, which was always called Israel, and brought back to Israel. At that point, from that point on, if you remember, the original Intifada, the fights when Golda Meir was the original prime minister of Israel, and the original fighting in the land of Palestine and Israel, there were multiple fights. We saw them in 47, 48, all the way down to 73, the Yom Kippur War, and so forth. What you may not know about is there have been skirmishes in the Middle East and wars in the Middle East every single year somewhere in what we call the Middle East since the 14th century, even during the Ottoman Empire. Currently, as we speak currently, there are 7 countries at war, one way or another. They include Sudan, and these are the Arabic nations, the expansion of the Arab nations. They include Sudan, they include Eritrea, they include Libya, they still include Syria, Yemen, and others. But we have been hearing a lot about Yemen. I served in Yemen for about 6 weeks. And if you ask me where the hairiest place in the world was that I've been in, it was Yemen. I was joking a little bit earlier that when we did sleep, we went on 50% security. And what I mean by 50% security, it was like this.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we did the other 50%, it was just switch the other eye. My time in Yemen was nerve-wracking. It was with a small team, and we were put into Yemen for a very short period of time. And from Sanaa to Aden, which are the 2 major cities in the south, Yemen has turned into an area that has become more and more hostile towards Americans. We were supportive of the government got overthrown, they're still fighting there, and as you know now, Saudis are on one side, Iran is on the other. And now when you talk about current problems that we have in the Middle East, they are all funded through one country, and that is Iran. And it all comes through Tehran. And where does Tehran get their money from? Obviously oil, but they also get their money through trade with China and Russia. And that's why you've heard American politicians talk about the axis of evil, where they talk about Iran. They took Syria out because Syria is dangling. We have forces in Syria. Russia has forces in Syria. Russia also has the Wagner group, which is their private mercenary group in Syria. And why? Because Russia's main goal is to have a port in the Middle East and to expand their ability to control the area and to gather what they need for their country. But I wanted to share an interesting story, which is actually a sad story. It touches my heart, to give you an idea of what we're up against. And I'm going to switch it to modern day right now. And I'm going to bring to your attention a name. He was an Army officer. His name was Brian Freeman. He served in my unit. I went to the Horn of Africa at that time. He went to Iraq. And Brian Freeman was in my detachment my company in what was called a CASO airborne unit, or a FIDUW, which back in the old days, FIDUW stood for Foreign Internal Defense Unconventional Warfare. Brian and his team were sent to Basra, which is towards the southern portion of Iraq. And he was sent to do a leader engagement with their local community. As he set up that meeting, and as they were heading to that leader engagement, they set up their security outside. They had about 6, maybe 8 men. 6 men. They had 6 men. They set up their security outside, and their team sergeant and Brian went into the town, basically the city hall, you could say. When he went into the city hall, he sat down for the meeting. At that same time, 3 US-made white SUVs, Suburbans, filled with men with blonde hair, blue eyes, M16s, and American uniforms, went through and were showing something to the Iraqi guards at the front gates. They were showing something, and they were American SUVs, American uniforms. They had M16s. So the Iraqis waved them through. As they waved them through, they drove into the plaza of the main community of the town of Basra. They jumped out and they shot the 2 sergeants on guard on the outside, and then went at the 2 sergeants by the door and shot them. Killed them. Actually, they killed 1, they injured a 3rd. They ran in, and again, Google the name Brian Freeman and you'll learn the true story. They ran into the town hall, they shot up the ceiling, grabbed the Americans, everybody else hit the ground, which was really interesting that they knew what to do. They grabbed the Americans, threw them in with the 1 injured American into one of the SUVs, and drove out. At that same point, a Blue Force tracker that we wear sometimes, I'm not sure if you're familiar, pilots would wear them sometimes too on flights. Did you ever wear Blue Force? It's a little Blue Force tracker which they would know where you're at your JOC, which is a Joint Operations Center, or at the Pentagon, or wherever they're looking at you. They'd see your light and they'd know your exact coordinates of where you're at. It's like a little beeper from the old days. If you remember the beepers that doctors used to wear and then everybody else used to wear, and drug dealers would wear. Kuzmano knows when I said drug dealers. What's interesting is the QRF, which is a quick reaction force, was called up. They went right after this group trying to find them with helicopters and a quick reaction force to try to save these men. They went after them. When these 3 vehicles saw that they were being followed, or they found out that they were being followed and that they were coming after them, they drove off to the side of this desert road, pulled the Americans out, and executed them with a bullet to their heads. And then they disappeared. The uniforms were left there, the guns, the 16s, the rifles were left there, the vehicles were left there with fake ID cards and everything else. We later come to find out that these were Iranian special forces, or what they call the Iranian Guard. And what they did was they knew where we were, and they would try to come in and capture Americans. What you may not know is, in today's modern Middle Eastern world, who is funding and who is giving technology is Russia and China. And Russia is by far the one that would up the game of trying to kill American soldiers and American Marines, sailors, and airmen. What you may not know is, in Afghanistan, we did the same exact thing to them. In 79 and 80 in Afghanistan, we introduced the Stinger missiles to take out the Russian helicopters, the Hind helicopters. And we did enough CIA and also covert operations to cause them problems in Afghanistan, which they later called the empire, the graveyard to empires. What they did in return is they came back and funded the Iranian special guards. And what the Iranians would do was teach the Iraqis in Iraq certain techniques of how to take out Americans. For example, you all know what an IED is, improvised explosive device. Well, when you're driving by something and you saw a mound, a fresh mound of dirt, and something that stuck out a little bit higher, and there was a stick and a wire that would lead out, you would stop your entire caravan. Because you'd think that that is most likely an IED, that somebody's sitting way out there with binoculars and with that wire ready to click, because they'd see when your vehicle would pass, they'd click it and it would explode. Well, we learned from many explosions and many deaths that to watch out for that. So then they got smarter. Then they would take artillery rounds and put cell phones on those artillery rounds and mark them so that when the cell phone lit up, if they called that number, it would light up the artillery round and it would explode. And they would dig it into the ground. Well, after a couple problems, we would learn from them, and we would realize that. So then they got smarter even more. Then they would capture a dog. Excuse me if I get a little bit in depth here. They'd capture a dog or an animal, gut the animal, and put it inside the animal and throw the animal carcass on the side. So now it's no longer a fresh mound, it's an animal carcass. You thought, oh, somebody hit an animal, you're not going to stop for that, and boom, it explodes. And we learned from that. We learned so much that we created jamming devices. And this is something that's no longer classified. We created jamming devices in all of our vehicles so that when they would be driving by, they would jam signals so that you couldn't call that cell phone to explode the improvised explosive device. And the way we found out about that was one platoon leader from the 101st Airborne Division who was driving through a very tight, and if you've ever been in the Middle East, you know that sometimes the roads are tighter and they're not made for Humvee-sized vehicles, especially with the guards, the brush guards on those Humvees. They have these metal guards out, right? They call them a brush guard. Well, the platoon leader stopped the vehicle because one of their brush guards hit a fruit stand with an older lady that was selling fruit, and he hit that fruit stand. And when they hit that fruit stand with the brush guard, the fruit stand kind of tore apart, and there was wires and mechanisms underneath a fruit stand. So they brought the EOD in thinking maybe that was a bomb. They realized what she was doing was she was capturing, turning off and on a device, and she would move that fruit stand and then capture signals that we were jamming, so that they knew what signals to work on and what signals to avoid. So if our vehicles were jamming a certain signal, she'd capture that, and that would record it, and that came from Iran. The entire mechanism came from Russia. So why are we in the Middle East at all? Some may say because of oil. Some may say because of freedom or helping our allies. Quite frankly, we're there for multiple reasons. The biggest one of them is money. It is, for national trade. And because votes from different regions speak loudly. We saw that in this election more than ever, when you saw President Biden put one foot in the camp of Israel and the other camp in those that support Palestine. Because he was concerned about votes out of Dearborn and in Michigan being a targeted state, right? So when you think about that, we're really there because of votes, because of people in the United States, because of money, and because of our State Department. If there is one thing that I will say, our biggest political problem does not often arise out of Republicans or Democrats. This is just my 2 cents here. It's out of the State Department, where you have a lot of long-term career people that make policy, and their policy outlasts a president's 4 or 8 years. And there are a lot of people in the Middle East that are U.S. State Department members that think that they can do better, that they can do good, and that they can make decisions. Now, without getting too political, President Trump, when he was elected, he said and this would outrage. The State Department was up in arms. They said, this was outrage, the Middle East. There'll be war immediately, and we're going to have so many problems. But what President Trump did was he said that we will finally move the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Every president ever running since the state of Israel became Israel has stated that they would move the embassy to Jerusalem, Republicans and Democrats. And then when they got in, it was always, we're working on it, we're working on it. And that's because the State Department said, no, 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 this is going to cause all-out war. President Trump did that. And what he did was he also started the Abraham Accords during that period of time, the negotiations, because he saw that there were two main powers. The two main powers now in the Middle East seem to be Saudi Arabia with their money and Tehran, Iran, with its influence. And that's where we as Americans, and I'm glad that Mia's here, because we as Americans were mentioning, we talk in these thoughts of that there's Shia and Sunni. And there's only Shia and Sunni in a fight when there's an issue to fight over, when there's power. And the Middle East has been a land that has been so focused, and correct me where I'm wrong, but it's been so focused on strong men leading their nations and their people. Instead of expanding their power, their economic power, their freedom, their education, their rights for their people, and a better community, more desalination, more water, growing things like in some cases Lebanon did, but in all cases Israel has. Growing more greenery out of the desert, bringing more water, desalinating it, farming, planting. We have all focused on how many weapons can I have to destroy my enemy. So when we look at the Middle East, and I'll wrap up and take questions if that's all right with you. I know I haven't given you any solutions here, because if I did, I'd be running for president. But and my vice president would be Odie. I need to reach out to the Air Force.
I'd be there for diversity.
We need those follically challenged. Sorry. Sorry.
I'm not touching that one either.
But the biggest dilemma we have right now is holding our word. When we stand with someone in the Middle East, that is one thing that they look at. They look at strength and they look at your word. If you recall when Obama said in Syria, do not cross this line, this red line in Syria, this is the red line, do not cross that. And Russia and Syrian forces crossed that line 3 times. And I'm not here to tell you politically who to vote for, but I'm going to show you the difference. When President Trump, and there's a commercial that actually airs about this, because this was an actual classified mission. When President Trump had his red line, the military draws those red lines, by the way, not the president. They say how far is far enough to protect the forces that we have, so that if somebody were to attack them, they could defend themselves or put a defensive position around. So the military draws that red line. So President Trump had that red line under a general called Keith Kellogg, who'll be here in about 2-3 weeks.
July.
Yeah, 11th at my house. So.
Yeah, 11th July.
Yeah. And General Kellogg and others, they would draw that red line through the NSA and through the Pentagon. And when that red line was crossed, the red phone in Russia, we call it a red phone, but in all actuality, the communications with Russia, because it's no longer in the Middle East, it's elevated to the top man in Russia. It was elevated. They've contacted them and say, pull back your forces. And the comment from Kremlin was, we don't have any forces in Syria right now in that area. He said, we're telling you again, pull back your forces. We don't have any forces. All right? They sent out a message on all the channels in Russian, and the troops kept going. And at that point, they had about 500 strong with ammunition, weapons, and vehicles. All 500 were destroyed within a course of about 2 minutes. From I believe they were F-16s from Vincenza Italy?
Aviano.
Aviano? Yeah, is that near Vincenza?
Not too far.
Aviano Air Force Base? Sure. And a few others, as well as artillery that was previously placed, and of course, Reapers and drones that were in the area flying around. And that entire column of Wagner, they were Wagner Group, allegedly, were destroyed. And never again was that red line crossed. It's interesting that Russia understands that. In the Middle East, and I leave you with this, they understand your word is your bond. If you say something, you better mean it. And number two, they understand strength. Now more than ever, you have more nationalization since 1956, since the Suez Canal crisis. And that's an interesting story in itself, about how we basically blew off Israel and blew off the English and the French, and Nasser blocked the Suez Canal. If you recall, in 1956, it was, not that I was there, Carl could probably tell us about it. But Nasser blocked off the Suez Canal and wanted more money for ships, especially French and English ships, because before, France and England controlled the Suez Canal. Well, when they had to give it to Egypt, they gave it to Egypt. What happened was they lost control and their prices went drastically high, and that they could hold some of these ships that were going through the Suez Canal hostage. So what happened? Israel needed weapons, and we had a Secretary of State at that time. Was it Dulles under Eisenhower?
I think so.
Dulles was not a big fan of Israel. He slow-walked everything. We really weren't helping Israel get the weapons that they needed to preserve their nation against any future attacks. So Israel actually got old weapons from Russia, and they cut a deal. I'm not sure if any of you know this, but they cut a deal with France and England. And the deal was that, and this was a secret deal, that they would attack Egypt. It would be a fake attack. It would be a phony baloney attack. And therefore, England and France would declare that they were peacekeepers, come in and open up the Suez Canal and take it over again. And that's exactly what happened in 1956. But the reason they had to give back the Suez Canal from French and English control was because Nasser created an Egypt, a nationalization. And now you have Egypt, you have Yemen, you have Saudi Arabia, instead of just one territory. You have Israel, you have the Palestinian areas, you have Lebanon, you have Jordan, and you have still fights amongst themselves. So I know I've given you a lot. I'd be more than happy to take any questions or respond to any comments you have. And I guess we'll open it up there.
Hey, Rock, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Could you touch maybe on what's happening in the Red Sea there in Yemen and shipping currently under attack? And
Do that in
how-
2 minutes or less.
Yeah, I can.
And how, I mean, and how,
That's a
and how-
long
and how-
story.
And how serious it really is, because they are doing damage.
Yeah, it's a serious issue. The Houthis, which are funded by, again, Tehran, are getting drones and weaponry. And no matter how inaccurate it is, only one of them needs to hit a shipping liner that's going through there. A lot of our goods for Europe, as well as the United States, still goes through that Red Sea and in through the Mediterranean. And if they have to navigate all the way around South Africa and around the whole Cape, you're talking about added time, supply chain pressures, and issues. And money. Yes, absolutely, big time money. So when they attack a ship liner, it's hurting us economically. It is hurting us economically, and they know it. And right now, they're causing every day, if I'm not mistaken, I believe every day there's 13 vessels that are somehow attacked or have issues going through there that are slowing down the supply chain. That many. So if they're not accurate, but they're accurate that much to just damage or to put out a problem, we've got a issue with economic rising costs and economic problems with our supply chain.
What do you attribute to the ineffectiveness so far of the response? Do you attribute that to mainly, is it the people who are in charge now? Is it the current administration? Or
Well,
do you
I'm
think
gonna
it's
get in
some-
trouble, but I would say, yes, Jeremy.
Well, I would say one is, we've taken a very defensive posture. We have spent a mint, and I covered
That's
that
exactly
before,
right,
on our multi-million-dollar missiles that we're taking down, $50,000 to $100,000.
Yep.
So it's been a very defensive, and our offensive operations, when you look at Yemen, you think it's the end of the peninsula, there's not a lot of people there, it is the poorest, driest area you'd ever want. There are 41 million people in that little country of Yemen, which is 3 times the population of Michigan. So when they're shooting stuff, they're big cities. There are a lot of people. There's a lot of infrastructure and everything there. So it's impossible to go in and do, here's the one strike
Pick
or
'em.
whatever. It's a Kobayashi Maru, for those that understand that one. The unsolvable equation.
No, you're absolutely right. And the areas that we could attack or could take out, we should, but we're not always doing. We're not always doing. And remember, by the way, if any of you have seen the movie Black Hawk Down, Somalia still looks like that, still today, even with their transitional government or their form of government. In that movie, the colonel, who's played by Sizemore, before he goes out on a mission with the pilots, says, what could be better? In the morning, they're all high on khat or chat. Yemen is the biggest producer of khat or chat. It's a green leafy opiate type that they stick in their mouth and they chew all day long from about 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And the reason that they do that, even though it's anti-Islamic, the reason you do that and you allow for that is because if your population is high, they're not going to revolt against the government when there's no food or jobs or future mobility. So yeah, the General's absolutely right. Again, we've got problems with specific strikes, and where we can take strikes, we usually don't. And I'm grateful that I got a book as my speaking fee.
Actually, we normally give, and I forgot to bring
the
one,
book.
but I owe you, the 30-millimeter big-ass bullet from the A-10.
Yes,
Great.
yes.
I have one for you.
That's what that'll go on my desk. All right.
I got
Thank you, everyone.